welcome to episode 3 of the John Shields case. This one we're titling All the Council's Men, and it covers the period from immediately after John rescued his son from the Mallard Church of Scotland home in late 1999 up to 2004. During this point, John and his family were resident in North Lanarkshire and were interacting with North Lanarkshire Council and Glasgow City Council and other state agencies. John, I want to start with getting your son home. We've described in the last episode how he had deteriorated hugely. His behaviour had become more and more difficult. He had regressed in many ways. He was a very sad, very unhappy little boy, and you took him out of that environment. You brought him home. How did you cope? How did he cope? Did he improve? What was the initial response to trying to get him back on an even keel and help him recover?
Well, when I removed John from care, as I said, on 2nd of November 1999, and we took him back to our home in Moodiesburn with him, there was good progress with John for a while. As I said, we had problems, everybody had problems. He went to school again from my place. We got a taxi arranged from my house to Cumbernauld, and that was fine, everything was going fine. One problem that we had with John was he wouldn't sleep at night. He had severe problems at night. We reckon, myself and my wife Janice, that for about 9 months after John been taken out of care, he never slept one full night. Sometimes we would wake up in the middle of the night and there was John standing at the bottom of my bed. And I was like, "What's wrong, son?" And he would just grab my hand and I'd need to take him back to bed, put him into bed. And then we had times where we heard noises coming from John's room, which was in a brand new flat, as I said, and he was next, there was 2 bedrooms. He was in his own room and we heard noise coming from the room, which made me go through to see what was wrong with him. And there, when I put the light on, there was a boy lying there and he's staring at the ceiling. And I'd put my hand over his face and he didn't even acknowledge that was there. He was actually in a trance. And John, being who he is, he's got severe learning disability, he takes seizures, that's what it looked like. He was getting affected that way. As I said, he's just lying there and you're talking to him and he's not even answering you. And he would just calm down, and all of a sudden, you know, he could wake up and he wouldn't know what was happening. So that happened for about a year. We had to put up with this and came to the stage that we needed help. Medically, we needed help, because I didn't know what this was. I didn't know why he was doing this. And we got a clinical psychologist from Glasgow City Council was appointed to, because we're in the Glasgow area, to come out, and he came out to help us. He knew exactly what this was.
So, and the other things that you'd reported, the problems with bedwetting, toileting, fear of going into a toilet, did all of that go?
Yeah, that kind of disappeared pretty quick. We never had the toileting problem. I said he was fine. It just took a wee bit of training with him between the school ourselves. He seemed to be getting back into things. At school, he was a lot better. He was more settled. He was mixing better. He was even, you know, he had his wee favourites that he looked after when he was at secondary school, at the school, Redburn Primary. And John was coming on fine. Everybody was good with the progress, and everybody thought we'd done the right thing, bringing him home.
Right. Okay. So this brings us to the report from the psychologist. So I'll quote this at some length and then get you to talk about it. And later on, we'll come back to the council's response, which I also need to quote at length. So that the psychologist here is a note, 24th December 1999, Greater Glasgow Primary Care NHS Trust, clinical psychologist report by Matthias Swanner and Jackie Howison to Dr. Robertson at Springburn Health Centre. They write, "Thank you for your referral of this 16-year-old boy who was resident in the Mallard and is now residing with his father. As you outlined in your referral letter, John has a background of epilepsy, asthma and severe learning difficulties. The main difficulties that led to the referral were relatively recent incidents of incontinence and deliberate wetting over the last 3 to 4 months." So they're writing, this is just after you've got him home. So they're referring there to the period in the Mallard, just preceding that. Following your referral, I had a chance to meet with John and his dad at home, together with my colleague Jackie Howison, clinical psychologist, on the 26th November 1999. So this is only like 3 weeks after you've got him home. So this is very fresh. He's just been freed from the environment in the Mallard. They continue. At the interview, Mr. Shields reported that since returning from the Mallard, John's behaviour has changed markedly. He no longer experiences any difficulties in using the toilet and no longer finds himself wetting the floors or his clothing. He is further not displaying any signs of autoaggressive behaviour. John's main difficulty at present is in settling to sleep at night. He is clingy with his father and will not go to sleep without Mr. Shields sitting immediately with him. During the home visit, John was present throughout the interview and seemed content. He spent the time watching videos, mainly of football and snooker. He sat on a chair on the floor with his legs under him, often bounding on his heels. No bruising was resulting from this, I point out. He was able to operate the video machine and the remote control and frequently raised the volume on the television. It was, however, unclear whether he did this in response to some of the difficulties discussed during the interview. John has no formal expressive language and was not able to participate in the interview. Throughout the interview, his father was interacting with John in an affectionate and caring way. So we then come to the findings from the psychologist's report. He writes, "We are, however, of the opinion that the pattern of behaviour reported by Mr. Shields over the past few years, such as the general deterioration of John's behaviour, the marked behavioural differences in different care environments, emergent regressive behaviours, together with some of the written and verbal accounts we heard and saw of injuries observed on John's body, are highly indicative of forms of physical and/or sexual abuse during that time period. After contacting both the social work department and the Mallard, we felt that at the time these incidents may not have been followed up appropriately. We understand that child protection procedures were carried out in 1996 following first concerns regarding observed bruising on John's body, but no formal investigations were carried out since, although further concerns regarding physical injuries and bruising and marked distressed behaviours have been noted and raised by Mr. Shields between 1996 and November 1999. Further, the marked change in John's behaviour after residing permanently at home, and this is only 3 weeks into that, he's writing, the emotional attachment to his dad once he was staying at home, and no further occurrence of any behavioural difficulties suggests strongly that during his stay at the Mallard, John experienced very traumatic incidents. So this is an expert in psychology, two experts in psychology, looking at John's behaviour, looking at the records, looking at your reports on his behaviour, but we've seen that those are all consistent with the written record. So there's no doubt about the accuracy of those. And coming to essentially the same conclusion that you did. So firstly, how did you respond to that?
Well, the report was done with the two clinical psychologists it was very good, it was well done. But the one thing that annoyed me concerning the investigations was they had no documents, no paperwork, no nothing to work on. They sat with me in my flat in Moodiesburn and watched a wee boy who was enjoying life, but they had nothing to go on. As I says, and even when they got involved to investigate, you know, and do a report, etc., the interference from North Lanarkshire against these clinical psychologists was huge. One, they shouldn't have been there according to what North Lanarkshire Council said. Two, one of them, Dr. Swanner, who is now a head clinical psychologist at Edinburgh University, he was the one who mostly done the diagnosis on John. They ripped him apart. They ripped him. They told he didn't have enough, what's the word I'm looking for here?
Or they implied he was a novice. We'll get to their attack on the report, because it's a fascinating thing, and I want to pull that apart in detail. But you know, so initially you felt that I've had support here. So what was the initial response? Was there anything positive from the authorities that said, well, okay, yeah, what you've been saying here is now validated by this expert opinion? Was there any positive reaction?
No, they didn't want to they didn't want to respond to any of this. North Lanarkshire Council, no way were they going to respond in a way that showed that anything had taken place in that home. They didn't, as I said, the report, they didn't care about the report. We even had a stage, you know, where the head of North Lanarkshire Social Work Department done personal attacks on these clinical psychologists. Because as far as he's concerned, his answer was, they don't know nothing. No, they're the people that are out trying to find out what's wrong with John, what he's went through in the 4 years, what he suffered. You know, you've read out what they said, John, what happened to John. When you look at the recordings and the diagnosis that was done, it was true. That is what the boy went through. But they were never ever going to accept that it had happened.
Yeah. So you're pushing during this period for investigation, for discovery of what's happened. I'll get you to comment in a moment about just what your campaign on behalf of your son was like, what you were doing. Well, a couple of bits were found in the file. Marion Mullen stated that the matter has progressed through our full complaints process. So you were pushing hard to a complaints review committee hearing, and has also been taken to the Ombudsman. Mr. Shields has also approached his local elected member and his MSP, in addition to both Glasgow City Council Registration and Inspection Unit and the Church of Scotland. They've all been involved in investigating Mr. Shields' complaints. Now, so you've been stirring things, right? You've been campaigning for a full investigation, and you've been raising the issues that there's abuse going on in the Mallet. So Marion Mullen, in the 5th of April 2000, wrote to Jamie Malcolm, stating, "I've now received formal confirmation that Glasgow City Council Registration and Inspection Unit are conducting a full inquiry into the care at the Mallet residential establishment from 1995 to the present day. This is in the response to the report received from Dr. Matthias Swanner and Dr. Jackie Howison." So, although, and we'll see how they reacted to the report, the presence of the report actually forced them into an investigation. So there was some progress there. The investigation has been coordinated by Jim Gibb, Principal Officer, Registration and Inspection Unit, Glasgow City Council Social Work Department. So that was, there's a couple bits more, but could you just take us through how you got that far? Because you've gone up to the Ombudsman, you've talked to MSP, you're talking to everybody. Just take us through your campaign essentially for justice for John?
Well, to be honest with you, when we removed John from care, and we had the help of an MSP. It was Elaine Smith. She was the MSP for Coatbridge and Christ and covering our area. And we went to her, and she was the one that actually helped getting these investigations ongoing with North Lanarkshire Council. As I said, Marion Mullen, I don't think I ever met her. I did get documentation from her, like she was the one who was arranging meetings, she was the one who seemed to do the answering, I said, but I don't really know who she was, as I said. But when this when I managed through pushing, also we had Glasgow City Council Health Board involved, and they were the ones that actually wanted the investigation done into John, the medical side. That they wanted all the documentation, they wanted to see this, they wanted to see that. As I says, we had a first class clinical psychologist who was based in Muirhead, who was out at my house all the time. If I needed a phone call or a chat, I would phone him, because he knew what had happened to John. He knew John had suffered mental, physical, emotional and sexual abuse. That is what they said, even the two clinical psychologists, Dr. Howison and Schwanner, and you know, they told us, you know, that this had happened. They knew that this was bad. But the council herself, when we pushed to get the investigations done, they just were not ever going to accept what anybody did.
Yeah. So we come to this kind of this response. There's quite a few things I want to quote here. So if you want to interject at any point, please do, because it's a fairly long piece, but it's vitally important that we get this on the record. So firstly, 14th of April 2000. So we're 4 months after the report, basically. Letter from Jim Dickey, Director of Social Work, North Lanarkshire, to Jamie Malcolm, Nursing Officer, Mental Welfare Commission. So he says, you will see that, contrary to the impression given to both this department and apparently to Mr. Shields, the involvement of the psychologist is intended to be short-term, and Mr. Swanner, who was on placement under supervision, has now moved on. Unfortunately, given the protracted and complex nature of this situation, I feel that the manner in which this intervention has been conducted has proved to be rather less than helpful. Which raises the question, helpful to whom? Because he's got at the heart, Swanner and Howison have got at the heart of what has happened to John, or it's certainly strongly indicated by all the evidence that's happened to John. And they're just talking this, well, it's rather less than helpful. That seems to be only if they mean helpful in terms of helpful for their reputation and our legal position. Before we go into the detail, would you like to respond to that comment?
Jim Gibb, who was a high-ranking North Lanarkshire official, who was in charge of the social work department. It didn't matter what the two doctors who were investigating were writing. Jim Gibb, he actually sent a letter out stating that Schwanner had no idea what he was talking about. The other lady, the other clinical psychologist, who Mrs. Howison, she was based in the Gorbals. She was the senior of the two. At the end of the day, she was the one that was asking more questions what Howison was doing. Schwanner were doing. And she was the one who helped put the report together. Now, first of all, when she arrived at my house, she was great. She was the diagnosis for John. She knew exactly what went on here. As soon as the report was given to North Lanarkshire Council, that was it. They went on the attack. They just attacked these two clinical psychologists to the extent, like even when you phoned Dr. Howison at the Gorbals Medical Centre to ask her for advice about John, she wouldn't have anything to do with you. She didn't want anything to do with you. Swanner was very true. He did, as soon as he'd done his report, he just vanished. He disappeared out of the face of the earth. He wasn't here. And that just shows you what North Lanarkshire do.
Right, so he was
Yeah,
sent somewhere else, a different post.
He was sent out, yeah.
Okay. So, 14th of February 2001. Right, so this is, we're a year and a couple of months on. Confidential report by Jim Gibb, Principal Officer, Registration and Inspection, Glasgow City Council, Social Work Department, and Margaret Ann McLean, Senior Social Worker, Families for Children, in response to the report by the clinical psychologists Howison and Swanner. Okay, so they've had a year to look at things, to process that report, and this is what they're coming back with. Okay, now, firstly, and this is right at the start, they write, the formal involvement of Mrs. Craig Mile, sorry. The formal involvement of Mrs. Craig Mile, solicitor for Enable, on the instruction of Mr. John Shields Sr., and the stated intention of taking legal action for criminal injuries compensation against various parties, not necessarily excluding Glasgow City Council, and the stated intention of involving the police, indicates that no further investigation of past events should take place until the police have completed their inquiries to avoid inappropriate questioning of witnesses. So this is the second paragraph in their response report, which has taken a year. The second paragraph says, if I can summarise it, because you've created such a fuss and the police are involved, we're not doing anything further.
Yeah. See, that came about because as soon as the report that was done with the two clinical psychologists, you know, as far as I was concerned, that was the proof that I needed, that things had happened in the Mallard. And I needed to take the next step forward. The step was like, I'd actually approached to become John's legal guardian. There was a guardianship thing where people like John, children like John who were getting into adulthood had to have a guardian. And so I was going for welfare financial guardian, which is a new thing in Scotland. And when that was done, I was like, well, by the time this goes to court, or I get a lawyer involved, we'll know exactly what to do, and I'll have the power, as they put it, to go forward with it. And then I found Enable were an organisation based in Glasgow who represented families and people with learning disabilities, and I chased them up, and I eventually got in tow with a lady by the name of Elizabeth Craigmile, and I sent her details about what had happened to John, and she was all for it. And as I said, as soon as she got involved as a solicitor, doesn't matter, you got to remember, this is the first time I've went to a solicitor about anything. And I put forward my story to her, what had happened to John, told her about the involvement of this clinical psychologist. So she says, okay, this is going to need the next step. So the next step was she started writing to Glasgow City Council. And I know right away between them and North Lanarkshire, as soon as I brought her in, they changed their attitude right away, North Lanarkshire. And she actually...
For the better or for the worse?
I would say for the better, because they began to realise that I'd taken a boy out of care, and I wasn't just going to sit there and take it on board what had happened to him and let it go. And as I said, she contacted the police officer. There was a police officer appointed. He came to my house in Moodiesburn, and they asked me all about what had happened. Now this, you got to remember, this was my first involvement with police. And to be honest with you, how I got this was, once the clinical psychologists had done their job, I think I just jumped in my car, headed into Paisley Road, went into the Procurator Fiscal's office. And I just went in there and I says, I'd like to report child abuse in the Church of Scotland home. And the next minute, this police officer ends up coming out to visit me, and he told me, like, I'm going to go to the Mallard and I'll ask questions and I'll find out what I can. So the chap went away, and true to his word, he wasn't too long here, and he came back to me, and I told him by that time that I've got a lawyer, Elizabeth Craigmile, and he says, well, get her to write to me. She wrote to him, and he told her what had happened at the Mallard. And the long and the short of it was, this was going to have to go to court because the police themselves couldn't do anything. As he says, he went up to this home and he interviewed every member of staff. And you can look at it any way you want here. He faced, every one of them had the same statement. They gave the same statement about what had happened. He says orchestrated, that was his words, orchestrated statements. He says it was the same thing. He says it was like lining 7 people up to ask him 7 different questions, and they all answered the same question. And the sorry thing was, this police officer was okay, but his problem was he was retiring. But he says his last words to us was when he visited us in Moodiesburn was, you're going to have to take this down the civil action way. He says, because we were needing a brick wall here.
Okay. So Jim Gibb continues. Since the need for any detailed inquiries as opposed to a broad review of what was done and when, by way of using appropriate child protection processes, would tend to be removed in most circumstances after the police have conducted the inquiries, this may in any event be a good time to bring this review to a halt. Legal advice received indicated that the review should be suspended. So we're in February 2001. They've been looking at this for a year and they're suspending their inquiries on legal advice. Did they ever unsuspend them? Did they ever continue their inquiries?
No. We never heard any more for a wee while, as I say, it was suspended. I think it's just because we had police involvement and we had a solicitor now involved, and she was asking questions and she was kind of threatening what was going to happen if they didn't come forward. As I said, in North Lanarkshire all they did was hide. They just hid all the time.
But the point I would make here is that North Lanarkshire have had 2 clinical psychologists saying that in all probability there was severe physical and sexual abuse in a care home for which they're responsible, which they'd sent people. They're suspending and never reinvigorated, never restarted their inquiry. So they've never actually properly inquired into this. His next statement is, the review is not yet complete to our satisfaction. So they're admitting that they haven't done a proper investigation.
No, they never did that with me. The next involvement would be, as I said, when the inspection unit had actually done a report. That is when North Lanarkshire got involved again. Okay,
right, so Jim Gibb from the inspection unit, he continues. The review is not yet complete to our satisfaction. Now, I'd point out that they're admitting that they haven't done a proper investigation, and it's never since happened. So there hasn't been a proper investigation from their point of view. But following an interview with one of the psychologists, examination of John Shields' file from the Mallard, and papers held by North Lanarkshire Cumbernauld area team, and an interview with staff at the school, examination of departmental records, the following findings are made. So they've not talked to you.
No.
They've not interviewed any of the staff at the Mallard where the abuse actually happened.
That was a strange thing about it. They never ever did.
Okay. And they've come up with these, what they term, provisional findings. Right. So they start off. There is no recorded evidence of any incident of John Shields Jr. being injured, assaulted or roughly handled by any member of staff at the Mallard, either in home school or area team or other written record material or recorded verbal information available to the officers conducting the review. Right? So there's no smoking gun on the files. Now, there wouldn't be. We're talking about illicit behaviour, so it wouldn't be on the files. They continue. Mallard is an establishment whose staff were alert to the potential for injuries by children on children. Before the two serious incidents in later '96, which led directly to improvements in staffing levels, which had been previously signalled as necessary. The Mallard is also an establishment whose staff are alert to the potential for injuries by staff on children and acted on the concerns about inappropriate conduct and saw that action appropriately responded to by external management. The Mallard is an establishment whose staff we're just praising the Mallard. Right? The Mallard is an establishment whose staff have experienced at first hand the impact of unexplained bruising on internal working practices, relationships with funding and regulatory agencies, and in relationships with the child's parents. Note the sequence: internal working procedures, funding, regulators, and the parents are last in the list, which is, I think, significant. Officers consider that there's a lot of praise for the Mallards. This is the opening lines. It continues, officers consider that some judgments made by a number of employees of the Church of Scotland, of Strathclyde Regional Council, and of North Lanark Social, it says North Lanarkshire, actually means North Lanarkshire, Social Work Department, may be legitimately open to retrospective criticism, and there appears to be a few critical points to have been missed opportunities to involve medical intervention or advice, and where the timing and urgency of the need to communicate critical information ought to have been sharper. So a very gentle criticism. The critical issue is that if on any of these occasions actual physical or sexual abuse has been missed, a child or children has not been protected, and the abusers are likely still to have unfettered access. So having said everything's rosy, they are admitting that, well, opportunities were missed, and if there's an abuser, that means the abuser's still got access. So essentially, even though this is a hit piece on your position, they are kind of agreeing with you there.
Yeah, I do. But you've got to remember, like, you've got these kids staying in this home. Some of them, their parents never ever come near the place. If there was an abuser in there, he did have unfettered access to them. He could do whatever he wanted in there. You know, when you look at the first thing they go at, there is no recorded evidence of any incident of JS, which is John Shields, being injured. Now, we've already proven that was a lie. That was a total lie. No, so you've got to look at these provisional findings and say, who done these provisional findings? Because as far as I know, when Jim Gibb and the other boy Tony Valvarese went up to the Mallard and they diagnosed what they thought, etc., they come back. Now, first of all, they come back telling me nothing happened to John.
Yeah, you raised a very important point there, because the first finding, right, is very specific, and it's not actually asking the right question. It's answering something else. It's quite subtle how it's done. There's no recorded evidence of any incident of John Shields being injured, assaulted, or roughly handled by any member of staff at the Mallard. Yes, but there is evidence of him being injured, assaulted, and roughly handled whilst at the Mallard, right? Right? No one has recorded, I saw a member of staff do X, but the bruising exists, the harm exists, the damage exists, and it happened at the Mallard. And that's a very subtle way of drawing a veil over the real issue.
You wouldn't expect a local authority to issue child protection, whatever they put on John, a child protection order.
Yeah.
Now they put an order on him. You wouldn't put that on an order. You've got to remember, this is done after it takes place. You know, they're recording, nothing happened to John. Why would you put a boy on a child protection order? Why would you do recording of bruises, assaults? You know, a wee boy, as what we've stated, bruised penis. there's documentation showing that he was abused big time, that set off alarm bells before he even went into care, and his first month in care. All these things happen, yet here you've got a report based, 5 years later, 6 years later, are turning and saying nothing happened to him.
Well, so they go through then the specific cases. Now, we covered in the last episode exactly exactly what happened to John and what the evidence was. So they go here, they say, right, marked bruising to John Shields, and they put in quote marks, scare quotes, bottom, right? Now, the word in the original record was rectum, which isn't exactly the same. Right, so they put quote marks around it, but it's not a quote.
No.
It's actually a substitution. Strange. Was identified on the 21st of October, whilst John Jr. was in his 6-week trial period, and communicated to the area team at the Child Care Review, which confirmed the suitability of the placement. Okay, odd. The suggestion was made and accepted that hard outdoor shoes combined with how John Shields sat was the probable cause. Better communication of bruising incidents was encouraged, monitoring of bruising for a period of 1 month instituted, and the requirement was assiduously followed by the staff at the Mallard. So, they're still, years on, relying on the idea that John bounced up and down in his shoes and did the damage to himself. Even though this was habitual behaviour, it was recorded by the psychologists when they came to see you in 1999 as still happening. But there was no bruising then. There was no bruising before the Mallard. There was no bruising at any other point. But they're still hanging their entire defence on this frankly unbelievable explanation for how the bruising to his rectum occurred. Next item, marked bruising to the back of thigh and arm, identified on 20th April 1996. They write, slight bruising appears to be noted by the mother on 18/4/96, but not passed to the home. Slight bruising was recorded by the home on the 19th of April and not communicated to either parent. Significant bruising emerged as increasingly concerning via the father and the school over the next few days, such that formal investigation by North Lanarkshire followed once the team was notified, and John Shields was placed on the Child Protection Register and referred to the reporter, although no assailant was identified. The medical examination indicated that being hit by a heavy object was unlikely. Close monitoring of bruising was reinstituted and assiduously followed by the staff at the Mallard. Slightly odd statement, because if they were assiduously following it before, why did it need to be reinstituted? But that's a minor matter. JS was subsequently removed from the register as it was apparent that most bruising appeared thereafter was normal and explicable. Okay. Normal and explicable in the Mallard, but not anywhere else. So they then go into sort of further analysis. They write, in neither of the two recorded incidents where bruising to JS is of a potential sexual abuse nature, i.e. the bruising to the anal region and to his penis, was he medically examined at the time. Right? Now, that's very significant, and they've identified that. So there was, they're not really expressing it in a very clear way, there was manifest evidence that was consistent with sexual abuse, and he wasn't medically examined.
No, he was never examined. The incident in November the 27th, which set all this in action, when an ADO officer appears up at the Mallard through a phone call, she carries out an examination of my son's anus in the presence of a doctor. And I've questioned that. Through police investigations that have been on prior, we discovered that the lady in question isn't alive anymore, but statement was given if she'd carried out what was called an investigation of John's anus, she would have been charged with assault, because she wasn't allowed to do things like that. It wasn't and to shine a torch up somebody's anus to find out whether they've been sexually abused. This lady did that. As I said, the one with the penis. Oh no, sorry, if I go back to the one minute, you've got to remember, as I've reiterated, John was never taken for medical examination.
That's the key. That's the key.
Officer. There was no police station, there was no hospital, there was no medical centre. All we had was an attending district officer who appeared at the Mallard and seemingly carried out an internal examination of my son's anus. As for the penis, as I've stated before, this was recorded at John's school. The social work and Cumbernauld were asked to come and view. They didn't come near them. When it came to John going back to the Mallard home, they refused to take him for an examination of his penis. It just shows you, like, every time something happened in the Mallard, us outside had to deal with the problem.
Yeah. So they record that he was neither of these cases was he medically examined at the time. They then go on to try and roll back from this. Medical opinion gained after the event event A, which is the bruising to the rectum, supported the conclusion that bruising was consistent with him bouncing on his heels while wearing hard, solid outdoor shoes. A sketch prepared by a non-medical staff member at the time showed bruises to either side of, but not at the anus itself. There's no evidence to suggest there was bruising of or in the anus. Now, the original record was Angela Gillis, John Jr.'s social worker, noted in the handwritten reports, December 1995, the bruising was noticed inside his rectum. So that's not true. That statement they've made is false.
Totally false. That set the alarm bells off of me being a father.
Yeah. Incident B is not recorded in the material provided by the Church of Scotland. So the Mallard, the bruising to the penis, the Mallard didn't record this at all. No. And was not referred to in any subsequent North Lanarkshire case review. It appears only to have been reported and recorded by you and then by the head teacher to the inspector, Tony Valbanesi, and to the psychologist, and not to have been referred to the area team or formally to a GP. So you're ringing the alarm bells, but again, it's not been reported at the Mallard. And none of this seems to bother them. So he continues. He's substantiating that everything's really okay. The records indicate regular attendance at the GP and specialist clinic in York Hill, providing, should it be required, a number of independent commentators as to how John was perceived and behaved over a significant period of time. Now, that again, he's listing that as a reason not to be concerned. The behaviour and the behavioural changes over the period of time was not only the reason you were concerned, it was the reason that the clinical psychologists had concluded that it was likely a case of severe sexual or physical abuse. So that's a very strange statement. And he continues, combined with the regime of physical examination by staff at the Mallard, this level of medical examination in relation to epilepsy, poor teeth, operation to the testicles to 2/11/95, and follow-up suggests that unobserved abuse would be improbable and that John, in spite of his lack of speech, would be an unlikely target for an abuser, aware of the level of independent examination. So his argument is an abuser would pick on someone else because John was getting too much attention. But this ignores all the behavioural signs that says this is not the case. So he then refers to you. He said, Mr. Shields states that he believes his son has been raped whilst at the Mallard and there has been a cover-up. The investigating officers found no record or reported evidence of file which supports this conclusion. Now, I find this strange. What did they expect to find? You know, Thursday the 17th, anal rape of one of the residents. You know, Friday the 18th, we had a meeting to discuss the cover-up. I mean, what did they expect to find in the file? What he found in the file was a record of John's deteriorating behaviour. That's the evidence.
Yeah.
Right? And he says there was no evidence on file to support this conclusion, which would suggest that you made it up. But your position, which is now supported by two clinical psychologists, is based on the deteriorating behaviour and condition of your son. And this seems to pass them by every time. It's sort of like the problem of you can't convince someone of a fact if their salary depends on them not being convinced. Mm-hmm. And he seems to have this strange blind spot. The psychologist says the problem is the change in behaviour points to abuse. And he's talking about everything apart from the change in behaviour. So he then goes on, elements of patterns of behaviour interpreted by the psychologists indicating probable physical abuse. So we're well down the list and we're now getting to the issue. Having occurred before admission to care as well as during his time in care, and in the view of the investigators are capable of alternative interpretation. The most obvious of these being that the father is recorded as being present at the relevant time on each of the three main occasions, although all, including his wife, consider that he's the least likely candidate for such an allegation. Right, this is there's a lot to unpack here, right? There's a lot to unpack. This is a bizarre statement. Let me see if I can just take it a piece at a time. Firstly, the patterns of behaviour he claims occurred before admission to care. Now, there's two possible explanations there. One, the patterns of behaviour were present when John was in the care of you and your ex-wife, which is, I think, what he's trying to suggest. Just for the record, were any of these patterns of behaviour apparent whilst John was in your care and your ex-wife's care before he went into the Mallard?
No, we both, I've got to say, we both never had anything like this. There was, when you look at what you've read there, you go, and you say, there was a list of candidates.
So if he doesn't mean that the behaviour was apparent when John wasn't in the Mallard, the other thing that he could be suggesting is because he was abused during the trial session before he was formally taken into care, right? He's trying to make some sort of division there. Now, if he's doing that, that's expressly deceptive, because he's trying to suggest, well, it was before he was taken into care, but he was still in the Mallard during the trial session. So whether the formal care order had been passed is irrelevant. So that's a very, very odd statement.
See, because John was put into care because his mother couldn't look after him. It wasn't because any of these issues that he's talking about here actually took place before he was into care. As far as I'm concerned, even though we'd separated my ex-wife, John was still living to me under the same regime that I done when I put him in the home. He was coming back with me, and he never showed nothing until he went into the Mallard. When you look at it, look at all this that's went on here. How this boy is trying to cover up and hide what happened in that home. Why would they be doing that if it wasn't to hide something?
Well, it's a very strange response. So the next bit, right, the most obvious explanation is a review, right? The most obvious of these is the father's record has been present at the relevant time in each of the three main occasions, although all, including his wife, consider he's the least likely candidate for such an allegation. Now, the fact that he should do that, that's throwing mud, right? That's trying to suggest, it could be many people, right? He's writing this a year on. During that year, your son's been improving dramatically. There's no bruising. There's no injury. He's happy with you. The psychologist records the warmth and affection of the relationship. He is not being reasonable in throwing that mud. That's an unreasonable statement done for effect, not because he's got any genuine belief that you're responsible. So again, I find that really reprehensible. They continue. There's evidence of marked change in behaviour towards the end of John Stuart Shields' time in the Mallard, in which toileting behaviour became more extreme and destructive of his own room and property. It is indicated that this behaviour was either not exhibited or quickly improved in his father's house when he moved there. Okay, now this is the whole case, right? He's distressed in the Mallard. He's beside himself with worry and grief and anxiety. He goes home with you and he's happy. Right? That's the case that there's something wrong in the Mallard, because look at his behaviour. Okay. How does the Glasgow City Council report respond? They say there is no obvious single explanation for this.
See, I got an explanation. Was when all this was happening to John, and myself and my partner Janice would bring it up to the social work or the Mallard, and they turn around and they say, John's shown this degree of distress because he loves you. I burst out laughing. I mean, like, he loves me. That's your reason for all of this, that he's doing all this because he loves me. I said, get a grip.
Right, so now, in the Glasgow City Council report, they also need to get a grip, because after he said, there's no obvious single explanation for this. However, in the view of the investigators, okay, and we now have a list, we have a list of lame excuses, okay, in the view of the investigators, right, which presumably is code for, we have no evidence for any of this, we just made it up. In the view of the investigators, anxiety to be at home, anxiety not to be at the Mallard because it wasn't home, not because there was any abuse, right? Hormonal activity related to puberty, adolescence, imbalance of epilepsy medication, no evidence for that, pain from problems associated with his teeth, are at least as likely as the psychologist's conclusion of probable sexual and physical trauma. So, what they've done is they've stuck to the wall a whole range of answers to see if anything will actually adhere. And they're saying, well, any of these could be as likely as the psychologist's conclusion. Even that doesn't say the psychologist's conclusion is wrong, because how can they? And frankly, the psychologist's conclusion has a lot more reason about it than any of this nonsense. Oh, it was toothache, right? Really? That's the response. Now, this is buried well into the report, because that's the whole case. John in the Mallard, miserable, unhappy, acting out in every way possible, major problems with toileting. John Manure House, happy. Right? What does that indicate? It indicates a problem in the Mallard. And they'll look every direction at any lame excuse under the sun, and they'll throw any amount of mud to try and get away from that conclusion, which the psychologist came to as well, and they can't really argue against, but they're trying. So, he continues, departmental reaction to these events appears tentative. To satisfy the child abuse guidelines at the time would have merited a report by the district manager to the deputy director of childcare. This did not appear to happen. It didn't happen. He likes to make it sound a bit vague. Although there is evidence to suggest that all of the relevant social workers and the immediate families involved were notified. It doesn't say by whom. Mostly, I suspect, by you. So they're basically admitting that the child protection procedures that should have happened didn't. No. So there was no medical examination of the relevant cases, and the child protection procedures that should have kicked in didn't. Okay. Now, so it then concludes with, if the review is recommenced at a future date, now we now know it wasn't, there's further actions required, and it's a big list. The list is 10. You're number 9. Possible interview with Mr. and or Mrs. Shields. So you're possible either or, right? So they don't want to talk to you. And he concludes the following, interim conclusions. The officer's interim conclusions is that no evidence has been found to support the psychologist's conclusions. Now, so that's number 1, bold, that's the thing. The officers conclude there's no evidence to support the psychologist's conclusions. Right? I maintain that that is not only untrue, it's manifestly untrue. Yeah. Because the pattern of behaviour is recorded in the files, there's no doubt that what you're reporting is accurate, and the pattern of behaviour is the evidence. So this is just denial of reality. Investigating officers found some of the departmental decisions by Strathclyde Regional Council and North Lanarkshire surprising. But these are out with the scope of the review.
Yeah, see, there's one thing we forgot. When I was dealing with the Church of Scotland, North Lanarkshire Council, they've got what you call a procedure that you've got to follow all the way up, right? And it went on like we attended what they call a committee review. Now, a committee review is you end up going to North Lanarkshire's headquarters in Mallow, and you get into a room, and I think I had my family, my solicitor was there to support, we had the social work department, Jim Dickey, who's head of social work, we're all at this meeting, and we all sat around this big table, massive big table, and we're sitting there, and across from us sat 3 councillors. Now this was the committee, and the committee are there to hear the evidence that was put forward. And we sat there and we gave a good account, my lawyer gave a good account, and we sat there and it came for the social work to do their bit, and it was absolutely, it was shocking. What they were, like you're talking there, how the departmental, you know, their investigations was put across, and that was a joke, you know, at the end of the day you're sitting there wondering what is going to come out of this committee review, and what are these 3 councillors who are sitting across a table that you're going to say. And once this was done, they turn around and they says, social work turn around and went like, Jim Dickey's name was, turn around and says, we'll get a report out to you concerning what's happened today. And then the 3 councillors sat there and they gave a report, and they turned around, and what they says to me shocked me more than anything that I'd heard. The 3 of them turned round and they got tore in to Dickey, head of Cumbernauld Social Work Department, for what they'd done, how they hadn't reported things to me, how they hadn't collaborated with me, what was going on with John, etc. And then the final statement was, they turned round and they says to me, do you know something, Mr. Shields? I feel sorry for your son. No, we feel sorry for what you've went through, but we're sitting here and we feel sorry for what happened to your son.
So they got it.
They got it at this meeting, and they knew exactly what was going on there. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, good, brilliant, feeling great. And I says, I look forward to hearing the report, stand up, thanked every one of them, and then we got a report. And the report came back from Jim Dickey. And you know something, this council done nothing wrong. Not a thing wrong, to the extent it was embarrassing. And then after that we'd say, okay, we need a meeting with you, Dickey. Because he'd been somebody on the outside making decisions, because he was the big man, he was the final man, he was the one who destroyed the 2 clinical psychologists. He was the one who said they shouldn't even have been investigating, they weren't doing that. So me and my partner arranged to meet him in Mallow. So we met him in his office, and we sat down, and he went through what he was doing. And at the end of the day, I was getting that boring. Oh God, can't handle this anymore. I went like, you know something, you're talking a load of rubbish. I says, you've covered up child abuse across the board. Don't hide, don't try to put words in my mouth, you have covered up. So me and my partner stood up, ready to walk out, and he turned round David and he hit me with the strangest comment that I would never expected of a man like him. He turned round and he says to me, you'll never be able to prove that your son was abused. That's what he says to me. He told me I would never be able to prove it. I was like in a bull in a china shop. I stopped at the door turning away like, to my partner Janice. Did he just say that to us? She said, yeah, he did. I turned and said, you wee bastard. And walked out of his office. Then I knew I had a fight. That was the head.
So it's very interesting, that the councillors got it, but the councillors' view was just evaporated like snow off a dike, and it was the officials that were actually writing the official report, not the councillors. The councillors reacted as human beings and got the situation, identified the situation correctly. But the officials then took over, and that was made of no effect. The final part of the findings from the Jim Gibbs report reads, records show real efforts by the Mallard staff and others to engage and share care and responsibilities with both sets of parents on a trusting, open level. But don't laugh, but that ultimately these efforts were unsuccessful. We conclude that within a dynamic in which Mr. Shields wanted above all to care for his son himself, there was no neutral ground for the Mallard to work in. So, again, it's your fault for caring for your son, as that placed the Mallard in an impossible position. What could they possibly do? And none of this addresses the core evidence that the clinical psychologists could see, the counsellors could see, you could see, and I'm sure our audience can see, that's just being skirted over. So, when did you get Mr. Gibbs' report, and what did you think?
Gibbs' report was given, wasn't it that long after they'd went to do their investigation at the Mallard, but we phoned their office, we told them, look, it was a piece of nonsense. And the thing about it was, they actually whistleblowed a member of staff who in there had assaulted, roughly, as they call it, rough, with 3 children. And it wasn't until later on we discovered that this was actually my son's team leader. And the team leader had assaulted children. And what the church did to try to cover this up was to take him out, and they pushed him into a home to look after adults with learning disability. It wasn't until years later that I discovered that he'd actually been taken into a police station under caution, and he was questioned about the abuse of my son. And the fact that he was his team leader, he was there all the time, the fact that he'd been abusing other children in there, they let him go. And they let him go on the basis that he couldn't remember who my son was, even though he was his team leader for 4 years. When Jim Gibb investigated that, you expected him to have come out and say, oh, wait a minute, that's terrible. The church knew who this man was. They knew that he'd been assaulting children. You look what you're reading about there and now, the amount of incidents that had happened to John when he was in there. Now here was a man that the church themselves knew was assaulting children. And they done nothing. Because they couldn't. They couldn't arrest him. They couldn't say, this man's been abusing children in this home. Because I would have got to know about it. And then everything, all this paperwork, would have been worthless.
Okay, so you've received these reports. We've talked about those in detail, and we're sitting here 2001 now. The situation with North Lanarkshire Council in particular, that I'm aware deteriorated very severely, and could you talk us through how that went from sort of mid 2001 to when you had to leave the area? Just talk us through what happened, what were you, what did you, how were the interactions with the various state organisations going, and what gave you cause for concern about the actions of North Lanarkshire Council?
Well, after the meeting with North Lanarkshire Council in Motherwell, we knew then, when the report came to us, that this wasn't right. You know, we knew the report was just one way, was to protect North Lanarkshire Council for what they'd done to John. So we decided, okay, what's the next step that we can do here? We've got the police have investigated. They've been met with orchestrated statements. They've told us we can't do nothing except go for a civil action. Now this is a civil action against a council who have covered up child abuse. And we needed help to decide on how we go forward with this. So we had an MSP, as I say, Elaine Smith was her name. She was a Labour MP, MSP, and we decided we'd get her involved. So we got her involved with a few meetings with her at our constituency office in Quiltbridge, and eventually we discovered she was on the board that went to meetings concerning stuff like this, and this would be presented to her. And it was a strange thing. We met her and she just turned around and she went like, what you're involved in? She says, with your son, she says, I was at a meeting and I couldn't mention that you were my constituent. She says, but what came across was, you're going to have to get here. And I'm like, what do you mean? She says, you're going to have to leave the area. I mean, go. She says, because what she stated was, it was the North Lanarkshire Mafia. She says, they talked about you at a meeting, that they were going to come, they were going to take John off you, and which means they would fit you up some way. A lot of the times that we were dealing with North Lanarkshire, like I've got a boy who can't do anything for himself. Although, don't get me wrong, he's no handless, he does wee bits and pieces now. Now this is a wee boy who's getting into adulthood, and North Lanarkshire come up with the craziest idea how it was like, let's get him see whether he can go out and work. I'm like, you're joking. And we ended up, we were dealing with North Lanarkshire Social Work Department, and they're like, well, we could see if John will go and work in a unit and work back Cumbernauld. And I'm like, what? And they says, yeah, well, maybe get him a job where he can sweep up. I'm like, he's a boy with severe learning disability, he doesn't even know how to hold a brush. He doesn't know how to brush his floor. Right? And they're like, oh, but he might be able to bag packages and boxes. And I'm like, you're joking. So what happened there was I rejected it all. And I'm like, John cannot do anything like this. So the next thing, they're arranging.
Are you guardian by this?
I'm guardian. Yeah, well, no, I still wasn't guardian. But the guardianship came in 2002, 2003, where that was a lady, Elizabeth Craigmile, the solicitor. She was doing the guardianships then, and she says to me the best thing for me to do was go for the guardianship. So actually I became the second person in Scotland to get the guardianship, and I put it to good use, as you know, as it says. But back then, when I was dealing with North Lanarkshire, it was just before, I think, before the guardianship was coming out, and they actually put on a show for me. Strange, it was a show, and I'm like, whereabouts? And it was at a Broadwood football park in Cumbernauld, and I says, okay, what have we got to do? And they says, turn up one day, and there was going to be other families there, and they show how they're going to be creative and bringing people like John back into the community, getting them working, getting them that. And I'm like, if I don't go along, I'm going to be looked upon as if I don't want anything to do with them. So me and Janice said, okay, we'll go along to this meeting. That was a strange thing, because when we arrived there, there was only maybe another family. It was just us and another family. This show had been put on for me, and it was a company down in England had been hired to come up and put a programme together where you had the screen, and disability children down in England working, and and I sat there and I'm watching it and looking at it, and I'm going like that, my boy will never do that. There's no way on earth he was going to work in a factory unit sweeping the floor. And anyway, it was done. Me and my pa, we sat right through it, and then afterwards it was the tea and the cake and all that stuff. I'm sitting there and I'm saying to Janice, I said, oh God, I gotta get out of here. I says, but I know what's going to happen. And it did happen. At the end of this production, I says to Janice, let's go, right, that's nice, thanks for us. Got up, went to walk out, turned round, and my way out was stopped by North Lanarkshire Council social workers. And they're like, Mr. Shield, what do you think about it? You know, like, do you not want to talk about it? You know want to put John forward? I said, look, to be honest with you, you can't do this. I don't even know why you've got me here. I says, this is not for John. He can't do this. I says, I don't even know why I'm here. I says, I gave you the benefit of the doubt that you're putting a programme on for learning disability children. I says, but sweeping factories, floors, and packaging and all that, I says, John does not know how to do that. And then we got the look of, we're going to cause you trouble because I wasn't taking this on board. Now this was something, if I went to John's school at the time, say, they want John to go and work in a factory unit and sweep floor, they'd have burst out laughing, they'd have thought I was drunk. You know what I mean? And this is what happened. And then afterwards, you sensed there's going to be problems here. And when we met Elaine Smith trying to get her involvement.
So when did Elaine Smith give you the heads up that it was time to get out of Dodge?
Could be a putting about it, it's very true. What happened was, we met her in Coatbridge and she turned around and that was it. And she just says, you're going to have to move. I says, okay, how quick? She says, how quick can you move? And I went like, right away. So we come home and we sat, and me and Janice, you know, got to remember, I got a business in the central area. I'm going to have to give up because I've got to move. Move where? So me and Janice were like, I says, right, where do we go? We went through and we started going to see houses in Stirling, and then Perth, Falkirk. We went through everywhere saying, do we get away? We've got to get away. And then I think it was Janice who said to me, it's not going to be far enough. Falkirk, Stirling, you're still too near. They'll find us. And I went like, okay, let's try Perth. So in the 3-week period after Elaine Smith told us to leave my beautiful flat in Moodiesburn, we ended up in Perth. And we're looking about Perth, but we just couldn't find anything good. And then they said, let's try further up. So we ended up going to Cooperangus, Scone, we like Scone. And a good thing was there was a centre there for learning disability. And I said, well, Scone was lovely, house prices were just too much. So we just decided, let's go further. So we ended up, believe it or not, a place called Blairgowrie, where I live. Never been in the place, never seen the place, didn't even know where it was. So we drove through to Blairgowrie, stopped in the centre of Blairgowrie, got out, and John walked about the Well Meadow, they call it, and we sat down and I said, I like this place, something about it. And we thought, well, let's see if we can get somewhere to stay up here. And we went into one of the estate agents and there was a flat going for rent, a place called Rattray. And we went up and we had a wee look and she says, how do you think here? And we said, oh, why not? We've got to go. And I'm going to be honest here, is like 3 weeks later I had sold my flat and I was leaving Moodiesburn to get away from North Lanarkshire.
So within 2 months of getting the tip, you've gone?
I'm gone. Well, it wasn't even 2 months, it was 3 weeks. We'd left our whole thing. I'd shut my business down, get away, and my partner had to give her job up. She worked in Glasgow, Slater Menswear in Glasgow, and we had to leave. I mean, we just got a van packed. I never told. I couldn't tell his mother, and I couldn't tell my own daughter that I was leaving the area. moving away up to a place I'd never been to. Because one, I couldn't tell her, or she would have told the social work, and they'd have been down and stopped us at the door. And according to what the threats that North Lanarkshire had made towards me, that Lane Smith told me about, was get the hell out of there now. You know, if it was a following day, I think she would have been happy. I never even told her I'd left. As I said, I got away. As I said, and that was it. I had to get away from North Lanarkshire Council. But it didn't stop them following me. They eventually did find me. They knew I was in Perth and Kinross, which is another story. I says, but their fight to remove John from me, to stop me exposing what had happened to him down in Glasgow, they were going to continue the fight. And that's what happened to this day, as it's been a fight against all these authorities. I says, but Elaine Smith was very true to her word. She knew exactly what was coming after me. The fact that we'd been to a committee review, as it says, and I go back to what a committee review is, you don't get these. You don't get committee reviews, you don't get as far as a committee review. As I said, it just, people that I talk to, you know, in agencies and other groups and that, they've never heard of it. Committee review, what's a committee review? And that's as high as you can go when you're going through fighting against authorities. I says, and at the committee review, everyone went in my favour again. They were found to have been guilty. But, as you said in your conversation there, that the councillors who felt sorry for my son and what had happened to him in that meeting were never even allowed to voice why they felt sorry for my son. Because North Lanarkshire stopped that. That was all North Lanarkshire wanted, was to stop this from coming out. Because the Mallard home, you've got to remember, it was a home that hundreds of children went through.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a point that we forgot to question, is that this home had 5 individual children with severe learning disability needs, whose half of them, their parents never even come near them. So they were under, whatever was happening in that home, these parents would never have known if their child was getting abused. And for somebody who, I'm not a clinical psychologist myself, but for through the 4 years that John was in the Mallard home, I had noticed severe deterioration in some of the kids that were in there. And then we had kids who went in there on a respite basis. And this was a respite, like they had like another 5 would be going through there every week. And when you look at that, it's nearly 300 children per month, per year, going through this home on a respite basis. We met one young boy who was there, and he actually told me at this time that one of the carers that looked after him had tried to approach him and touch him. But we had no proof that this took place, and I couldn't do nothing for the boy. The only thing I know is like the boy never ever went back again, because he told his parents. You know, I mean, one of the things that's come out is the fact that there was other children in this home who were being abused. We've already met one father who's, you know, fine about his son.
Yes, and it's a very similar story, and a lot of the behavioural problems that you've described, he independently described. So, John, we'll leave it there for this episode. You've now had to flee your home, and you've chosen your son over your home and your business, and you've gone to protect him to Blairgowrie. And that's where we'll pick up the next part of the story, dealing with Perth and Kinross Council.
Great fun, isn't it?
Till then, John Shields, thank you very much.
Thanks, David.